Good morning, I'm Rachel, and welcome to Third City Christian Church. Our worship service starts in just a minute and will last about an hour. But before we get started, we want to share a few things with you and your family. Groove, our Sunday morning kids programming, is taking place right now in Kid City. Team members are standing by in the plaza to help you get your child checked in. We want every child at Third City to grow in wisdom and stature, just like Jesus did when he was a kid. Our vision at Third City is to live out Love Unlimited, and we want to make it easy for you to know what your next step is, whether it's serving, getting baptized, or growing in community with others. We want to connect you with the resources that will help you worship, serve, and grow. Stop at the hub in the plaza and find out what opportunities are available. We would love to meet you, answer any questions you may have, and if you're new here, we have a free gift for you. We are so glad that you're here with us this morning. Be sure to connect with us at Third City C on social media and download our Third City app. We exist to worship God, serve Him with our lives, and grow as followers of Jesus Christ. Third City is Love Unlimited.
Good morning, welcome to Third City Christian Church. Would you stand up this morning as we begin our worship? This is Missions of Hope Sunday. We're excited about this morning. I've heard 1,000 stories of what they think you're like, but I've heard tender whisper of love in the dead of night, and you that you're pleased and that I'm never alone. You're a good, good Father. It's who you are. It's who you are. It's who you are, and I'm loved by you. It's who I am. It's who I am. It's who I am. I see many searching for answers, far and wide, but I know we're all searching for answers. Only you provide, 'cause you know just what we need before we say a word. You're good, good Father. It's who you are. It's who you are. It's who you are, and I'm loved by you. It's who I am. It's who I am. It's who I am. You are perfect in all of your ways. 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 You are perfect in all of your ways to us. Love so undeniable, I can hardly speak. Peace so unexplainable, I can hardly think as you go deeper still as you go. Deeper still as you call me, deeper still into love, 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 love. You're a good, good Father. It's who you are. It's who you are. It's who you are. about this morning. We're excited that we get to share the things that God has done through the faithfulness of his people here at Third City. So let's continue in worship this morning. We're singing this song that we sang last week. It's a great song. It's called Surrounded. Let's sing it together.
Your body and your blood you shed for me. This is how I fight my battles. There's a table that you prepared for me in the presence of my enemies. It's your body.
There's a battle that we're in, a battle of the darkness, but we also know that through Christ Jesus all things can overcome, so we're excited about that. Sing this out.
It may look like I'm surrounded, but I'm surrounded by you. It may look like I'm surrounded, but I'm surrounded by you. It may look like I'm surrounded, but I'm surrounded by you. It may look like I'm surrounded, but I'm surrounded by you. It may
about those words because we know that through what you're doing at this church, through the Missions of Hope International, and through the connection that we as a church now have with that mission, we can start to surround the enemy. Through the people who have given to this, who have sponsored children, who have given to one of our Christmas offerings for this, or who have been in prayer, we are surrounding the enemy. We know that your son Jesus, because of the sacrifice that he made, his love will prevail. His love will overcome. And we're excited to see what you're doing. Not because of this church, but through this church. It's all about you, Jesus. We're excited to be a part of what you're doing. Thank you, Jesus. Amen. You may be seated.
One of the hottest debates this time of year is when to put your Christmas lights up. I know some of you guys, like as soon as October 1st hits, you're already drawing schematics on your roof lines and all of that. But this is the fun part. Thanksgiving is coming, and officially the day after Thanksgiving, you are allowed to turn the switch. So all of you guys that have been waiting, or people have been mocking you going, don't you dare turn those on, this week, everybody gets to turn them on. The other thing that happens this time of year is, if you guys notice around stores, the Salvation kettles start coming out. People start thinking about other people a little more this time of year. And I think about that song we just sang, the battles that we're fighting. We start thinking about the battles that other people are fighting. Some of the stuff that our church does locally, I love Project Hunger. They handed out almost 900 boxed Thanksgiving meals that included like ham, potatoes, dessert, like all that stuff. Like, yeah. And it's really cool getting to watch the church be the church in that environment. And so not only that, we also do things globally. A couple months ago, we as a church got to partner with Kent Mann, one of our elders, as he went to Livingstone University and was able to teach over there for a couple weeks. We got to offer their university a financial gift of $5,000 that they weren't expecting, and they've actually experienced some stuff recently that money is going to help, I hope is going to help with some flooding that's going on their campus right now. They're supposed to be having graduation, and they've got like 4 or 5 feet of water rolling right through their campus. So it's cool seeing God provide in advance through his people. But the exciting part of today is we get to hear from our Kenya team and Missions of Hope International. We're going to see the team come on stage. They're going to have a brief opportunity to give their testimony. And so I need to be brief because their story is way more fun than anything I'm going to share. So check this video out and let's start to hear their story.
Well, good morning, Third City. My name is Parker, and I get to share some stories of my friends and I on the other side of the planet. And I want to kick it off by reading a proverb, Proverbs 25:25. Like cold water to a weary soul is good news from a distant land. That's the essence of this morning. We talk about MOHI a lot. It stands for Missions of Hope International. It's an organization that started 20 years ago with the vision of if the students could know and love Jesus Christ and have a hope for the future in education, the whole family could be reached and the whole community could be changed. MOHI started out with 50 kids in a class, and today they have over 15,000 kiddos in these schools. In primary, secondary, boarding schools. They also have skills academies for adults. And not to mention, there's a church in every single neighborhood that one of these schools exists in. It's pretty incredible what MOHI is doing and what God's doing through that. So first up this morning is my story. You might remember last year around June, I was to interview and preach on missions when our team from Guatemala came back. I was to talk about the topic of how we should all be going into the world, but the Spirit convicted me that instead of standing up here and telling you what you should be doing, I needed to tell you why I wasn't doing it. And it was a moment of me telling about the terror that I have of overseas missions, my fear of risk and losing control, and it's quite embarrassing to talk about that as the church guy, but it was completely necessary. And so here I was last December in the initial meeting of going to Kenya this year, and I got freaked out by all the shots we had to take and the chance of getting diseases and viruses and a mosquito bite that can ruin your whole life. Not like any of that could happen here. But I, once again, put my tail between my legs and walked out. And I completely failed as a husband to lead spiritually, to pray about it, to talk about it. I just gave up out of fear. And so for the next 4 months, I had this spiritual gut ache. It was like the feeling of telling a lie and you knew you told a lie. And after one night that I thought my anxiousness couldn't get any worse, I was journaling my prayers like we learned to do in Rooted the next morning, and not thinking about it, not talking about it, not considering it for the last 4 months. All of a sudden I wrote, "Am I being disobedient not going to Africa?" And the gut ache went away immediately. It was a deeply, deeply spiritual moment for me. And deeply convicted against all my fears and terrors and loss of control, Jane walks in, my wife, after a morning workout, and I look at her. I'm sitting at the kitchen island. She looks at me. She can tell something's up. I said, "Jane, I think we have to go to Kenya." And she said, "Okay." She's like 8 times more brave than I am. And so I had some conversations that day with some wise people that I knew loved me, loved God, and loved the church. And the summary of those conversations was, you have got to lead your family in faith, not in fear. And so at that point, I thought I was just going along for the ride. I was like, cool, I can handle this. And then a week later, I found out that the staff that was going to lead is not leading anymore, and I hear the words, "You're leading now." You got to love how God always gives you exactly what you want. Going to a place I've never been, doing a thing I've never done and quite terrified to do. But that's a lot like God. And honestly, that's the story of my life. And so here we were. Long story short, I went to Kenya, and I'm fine today. So, and I'm better for, yeah, right, let's go. I'm fine. And I'm better for it. I'm better for it, though. And it was so good for me to learn what faith truly means in action and how to trust God when I doubt, and I'm so insecure about that. And the 4th day, Melanie Musson came to me. She was co-leading the trip with me. And she said, "Have any of your fears been realized?" And I got to smile and look back and say, "No, not a single one of them." Which leads me to Caroline's story. On the 5th day, we did a community home visit with the social workers of MOHI. These social workers are hired in each and every school with the sole purpose of providing love and support to people in the community, whether they are affiliated with the school or not. And the second home we visited was no larger than that drum riser over there, and it belonged to Caroline. Caroline was a breast cancer survivor, and on the road to recovery, her sister and daughter had put their lives on hold to help her back to health. Her sister stayed in the room, and her daughter sat outside while we were visiting. And through the grapevine, the MOHI social workers had heard Caroline's story and came to pray with her regularly, unknowingly healing a wound that was given by her former church of her feeling like she had been forgotten in her illness. And she was beginning to love the church again for what it truly was, and that's people being there for each other. And as we talked through translation for 15 minutes, I asked to speak to her. And I tried to tell her how astounding it is to me that our little church in Nebraska, who is supporting Mohi and Karyobungi, which is supporting the social workers, is indirectly yet directly loving her without even knowing it. That love was making its way across the entire planet into her home in Karyobungi, and she was feeling it. And she smiled. She looked me right in the eye with a glimmer in hers. And she said something in Swahili that I couldn't understand, but I could tell came from the bottom of her heart. And I looked at this translator, and he said, "She wants you to tell your family, your church, thank you for loving me." And I promised her I would. I'll never forget that moment. Someone who was lost, now found. Someone who was spiritually wounded, who is being healed. I'll never forget what love can do. How far love can reach. How unlimited God's love is for people. And then check this out. We, just a few weeks ago, got to meet with Mary and Wallace, the founders of Mohi. It makes the world feel small. They were here in the States for a few visits. And from across the table, I overheard Mary telling Scott the story of a woman recovering from breast cancer in Karyobungi. My ears kind of perked up. She said, she's felt so loved by the visits being made to her home, particularly the one when your church was there, that her daughter, who was sitting outside, a teenager at risk of not being able to provide a future for her child, someone who never got the chance to go to school, that daughter felt so loved in that moment that she decided to do something very challenging, very risky, and very scary. Go to school. And Mary was giggling and laughing, and she said, "I will absolutely find a way to get this girl education and preach the gospel to her in her life." Can you just imagine, Scott, a teenager sitting, willing to sit in a first grade classroom? And that's when I finally popped up and piped up across the table. I said, I was there. I was so glad I was. I could tell you 1,000 stories this morning. But here's something, my family, that I want you to know. When we were going through our orientation on the first day, Mohi was explaining their vision, and it sounded something like this. At Mohi, we will love and reach the children with the gospel, and we know that once the child is won to the Lord, we can reach the entire family. It sounded very familiar. I don't know how many people I've met here at Third City that have come here, accepted the gospel, and started living a life following Jesus Christ because their kids were loved here. Throughout the rest of the orientation, there were several points where, sans the location, you could have swapped out the name Mohi for Third City and it would have fit like a glove. We're sharing the same heart beating on two different sides of the planet. And that's what I want to leave you here with this morning. From my experience, I've now traveled to the other side of the planet in a completely different culture, literally as foreign of a place that God could put me. And the same exact gospel that I see saving lives here is the same exact gospel that I see saving lives there. Setting people free from sin, giving them hope and purpose with a love that is unmatched and unlimited. It is good news that is busting through cultural boundaries. That's the real deal. The gospel is the real deal. The good news that we, deserving wrath, God decided to send his son instead to pay for that wrath, to set us free from it, and to rise from the dead by his own power to show he's got all control over the death and burial and resurrection of his own self, and then we get to have a new life out of that. That's the real deal. The gospel is the real deal. Like cold water to a weary soul is good news from a distant land. I have more to show you from Kenya. give a round of applause to my brave friends who are coming to tell us some stories this morning. This is Carol Wing and Brian Cokes. We went to Kenya together, and I have a few questions for them. The first, ladies first, what is a story or a memory you'll never forget?
The very first day that we were in Kariobangi, well, actually, this was at Pangami, we walked through the slums, and we got to visit the homes of some of the people living there, and my group visited the home of a young lady who had a 2.5-year-old child. She lived in the very last row, or the furthest back from the street, if you call it a street. And we had to wind our way through a very narrow, dark, dank, smelly passage to get to her very small room. But we got to ask her lots of questions if we wanted to, and we had our Mohi staff members with us, and they also asked her questions. But one of the things that one of the staff members focused on was her faith in God. While we were there, she said she believed in God, but she did not go to church. He encouraged her, and she confessed her faith in Christ, said she would be in church the following Sunday. But the thing I'll never forget is that he told us that every opportunity that he had, he witnessed and talked about God with the people he was meeting and working with. And that was evident in all of the staff members. They would walk the walk and talk the talk. Unlike most of us here, we will talk about God when we're in church, but when we're away from church, that's another matter. So I think one of the things I learned is that the people there really appreciate more what God does for them than the material things that they have. We focus on too much of the materialist things, and so they really show in the way they react to other people that God is important to them, their friends are important to them, not the material things that they have.
Yeah. Thanks. What about you, Brian?
So for me, it was the initial sights, the smells,
Yeah, totally.
all the darkness of the area, but that was quickly brightened when we pulled up to the Kariobangi school. You got to see the blue gates open up, which you saw in the video.
Yeah.
To me, that was just, I guess, God opening his arms and saying, welcome, come in. You know, we got work to do.
Yeah.
Matthew 9:37 through 38 says, he said to his disciples, the harvest is great, but the workers are few. So pray to the Lord who is in charge of the harvest and ask him to send more workers into his field. So, I just look forward to returning to the Kariobangi field and seeing how his harvest is coming along.
That's awesome. Next question. What is something that God has changed in you after this trip?
Well, as many of you know, I did not want to go to Africa. I've never wanted to go to Africa. And I found lots of excuses why I should not go. But as those excuses were eliminated, and I finally said, okay, I'll go, God, I had a lot of peace in my heart. I've never felt that peace in the way I did at that point. But God's given each of us many talents, and one of my talents that he has given me is sewing. And so I was involved with teaching quilting to a group of 16 young people. One of those young people was a young man who you saw or will be seeing in the videos. He had been in prison for killing somebody. He got out. The police started looking for him and chasing him, and he ran into a church and was there for a period of time. He accepted Christ as his Savior, and then he became connected with Mohi, and he wanted to make something of his life, so he got into the tailoring class. Can you imagine one young man with 15 young women in a class? Felt sorry for him in that respect, but he was doing an awesome job. But there are lots of stories like that in the skills classes.
Yeah.
But I learned that God's given us talents. We're supposed to share them, not keep them to ourselves. And because I was willing to share, God blessed me more than
Yeah.
I can imagine. So we just need to remember that we each need to share our talents wherever God calls us to share them.
Yeah, I think even that guy's story is one of the evidences in my life that the same exact gospel is changing lives here is changing lives over there too. It was his story. So, Brian, for you.
So God changed my world by making me realize that our time here on earth is
Yeah.
pretty short-lived, and probably shouldn't spend it being comfortable.
Hmm.
Obviously, I'm up here. This is an uncomfortable situation, but I felt like my faith was beginning to feel a little stale, and I was maybe too comfortable.
Yeah.
And I needed to grow. So when my wife and I decided to be a part of this missions trip, we knew that was an uncomfortable choice we had to make, and we knew there was going to be quite a bit more uncomfortable situations while we were there. But being uncomfortable has never felt so good before. Once we completed this, I didn't realize being uncomfortable could be such a great experience.
Yeah.
But it meant that I got to have a front row seat and see God's best work, not only in me, but the rest of the missions team.
Yeah, I totally agree. Well, round of applause for my brave, uncomfortable interviews. Before we show you this next video, I just want to give you a thought before we head into communion too. This thought of being uncomfortable. Man, did God do that for us? Where he came, instead of us having to ascend to him, he came down to us and chose to save us in our muck and our sin. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. And so I want you to think about that while you take this moment of communion and as we show you more stories from Kenya.
Mungu kama wewe. No other God like him.
Yeah.
So when we are walking, we are searching for God. Where can we find him? Nowhere. But he's there.
tell it to the masses that He is God. Shout, go on and scream it from the mountains. Go on and tell it to the masses.
This is your card. This is the card that we all share. As Parker said, we have come to partner with a family that is our family, and that is our family in Nairobi. And there are three things that I want to ask of you today. All three are crucial to our partnership with our family in Kariobangi. The first is to pray. A church is starting there this fall. Solomon is the preacher, a young man who's from that neighborhood. We're really excited that Solomon is going to lead that church, but keep him in your constant prayers as that church launches. The second thing is that the key to this whole thing is that we support it financially. And just like we would here, when we need facilities, when we need any kind of ministry, we're going to do our very best. And last year, if you remember, we had our Hope for Kenya offering during December. We're doing the same thing this year. And the goal is to continue to work toward building our school. And so our December offering will go to that. We ask you to be as generous as you possibly can beyond your regular giving and tithes to help us to complete our school building. It's about a $300,000 project. That school will house up to 1,000 students. Really an amazing thing. But whatever you can do to help us with your offering, we'd appreciate it. You'll be hearing more about that. And then the third thing is child sponsorship. Last year, 250 of you began this great work by sponsoring children, and you got to see a lot of them on the screen today. But we need immediately about 38 sponsors for now, kids who are now in our school, and then another 90 that'll start in 2020. So go out to the table in the plaza and pick up a card if you're able to. And for about $38 a month, which is about what the average family spends on toilet paper, we can sponsor a child who can get everything they need for subsistence, for education, and spiritually. What a deal. Thank you for partnering with us.
Let's stand and close in worship this morning. Christ is going to use our church, continue to use our church to do amazing things. It's His breath in our lungs. Sing this out. You give life, you are love, you bring light to the darkness, you give hope, you restore every heart that is broken. Great are you, Lord. shout your praise. Our hearts will cry, these bones will